Formula One is one of the most exciting sports in the world, full of speed, adrenaline, and breathtaking competitions. But behind the races and the speed, there's a dark side that few people know about. We're talking about power, money, and politics. Have you ever wondered how secret decisions and backstage games can affect the future of drivers and teams? Why do some teams dominate the championship while others fall behind? What's really at stake when the lights go out and the races begin? Stay with me until the end, because today I'm going to reveal how these invisible forces control F1 and shape everything we see on the tracks. I guarantee you will never watch a race the same way again. When you watch a Formula One race, you might think everything depends only on the drivers, the cars, and the teams. But there's a hidden side, much less visible, where political decisions and external influences are the real protagonists. These decisions, made far from the cameras, have a huge impact on each team's performance, even changing the future of entire teams. In reality, many of the rules that govern F1 are created at negotiation tables, where major teams and their representatives put pressure to shape the championship in their own interests. For example, the choice of which technologies are allowed in the cars, the budget caps, and even the types of fuel used in races are decided through political agreements, not just technical matters. Some teams, with more financial power and historical influence, are able to form alliances with those responsible for setting these rules. This means that when there's a change in how the championship is run, the most influential teams usually adapt faster, while the smaller ones may struggle to keep up. This power play behind the scenes can hurt smaller teams that don't have the same lobbying power over decisions. For example, the introduction of new aerodynamic regulations might benefit a team that already has more expertise in that area, while another team, without the same resources, is forced to spend more time and money to catch up. These changes don't happen by chance. They are negotiated and are often the result of subtle political pressures that directly affect track performance. In other words, the F1 grid isn't just made up of the cars you see speeding by, but by a series of political decisions that influence which teams have the best chances of winning. And these decisions are often driven by those who have the most power and resources to enforce their will. It's important to understand that while the public focuses on the races, the teams are constantly moving behind the scenes to ensure their position is protected. The deals made off track are just as crucial as practice sessions and races. No matter how talented a driver is, the team with more political influence can create conditions that favor their performance. And speaking of power and influence, we can't forget that behind all of this, money plays a fundamental role, acting as one of the biggest drivers of these decisions. In Formula One, money isn't just about sponsorships. It has the power to change the course of a career and even decide who makes it to the podium. Many times, a driver's talent is overshadowed by whoever has the most resources to invest in technology and development. When big corporations step onto the scene, they bring not just money but also a network of influence that can be decisive for a team's success. Teams with massive budgets can hire the best minds to develop their cars, invest in next-generation simulators, and even create ideal working conditions for their drivers. This means that teams with more money have a significant advantage over smaller ones, which can't compete at the same level when it comes to technology or infrastructure. Even if a driver from a smaller team is extremely talented, he might be held back by the lack of resources. Money also influences driver selection. Many times, sponsors prefer to invest in drivers who bring greater visibility or who already have a loyal fan base, regardless of pure skill. This means that in some cases, less talented but more marketable drivers end up getting opportunities in big teams, while others with better performance are left out. Additionally, when a team has more money, they can test more, adjust more, and improve their performances much faster. Big teams can use funding to buy better parts, have more track time, and work more intensely on car upgrades. This creates a cycle where money not only buys better results, but also ensures the team stays at the top. Money can also be a key factor when negotiating contracts and securing advantages with sponsors and other partners. For example, just having a major sponsor might be enough for a team to get better supply deals or even tax benefits in certain countries. All of this directly impacts competitiveness in Formula One. This dependency on money creates a huge gap between teams, and makes it hard for smaller teams to compete on equal terms. With so much financial power at stake, it's clear that talent alone isn't the only factor to consider. More than ever, money plays a critical role in who shines on the tracks. And if money is such a powerful engine, the secret deals happening behind closed doors make that power even more hidden and effective. And can you see how money influences team performances in Formula One? Drop a comment if you also think that big corporations have such a massive impact, or if you know a story of a team that overcame the lack of resources and managed to compete at the highest level. Let's debate this in the comments. Formula One is undoubtedly one of the most exciting sports in the world. But did you know that behind the scenes, top teams have a series of secret deals that help keep things exactly as they are? Often, these negotiations aren't visible to the public, but they have a profound impact on how the races unfold. Major teams like Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull wield enormous power and know exactly how to use it to keep the competition in their favor. These deals can involve everything from partnerships with parts manufacturers to negotiations over broadcasting rights and sponsorships. For example, a top team may have access to resources and technologies that smaller teams simply don't, creating a disparity in the level of competition. And this doesn't happen by chance. It's the result of years of backstage agreements and alliances that ensure these teams stay at the top. But it's not just the big brands that benefit from these deals. Smaller teams, hoping for a chance to shine, often end up aligning with these powerhouses, entering into agreements that may seem advantageous at first, but ultimately limit their long-term ambitions. This dependency relationship makes the status quo in Formula One practically unbreakable, with little chance of drastic changes in the hierarchy. Moreover, there is a constant game of alliances between teams and even with Formula One organizers themselves. These deals often influence decisions about the championship's rules, creating a cycle where the same teams continue to dominate. In exchange for support and important votes, top teams can ensure that any changes favor their interests. This type of dynamic is nothing new to those who closely follow Formula One. And when we talk about secret deals, it's important to remember that many of these negotiations happen between the team's own sponsors. Major brands like those sponsoring Red Bull or Mercedes play a much bigger role than just having their logos on the cars. They participate in strategic decisions and can even influence driver choices and team direction, ensuring their investments are always protected. This type of behind-the-scenes control is what keeps Formula One in its current form, where a few teams dominate the championship year after year. While it may look like there's fierce competition on the track, the real battles often happen off the track and in boardrooms and confidential deals. Formula One is, without a doubt, a sport where power and influence often speak louder than pure driving skill. While the big teams and their deals maintain their grip on the competition, money remains the key to ensuring the necessary resources for domination continue to flow. While the major Formula One teams continue to dominate the competition with their immense financial and political power, smaller teams face a constant battle for survival. With limited budgets and fewer resources, these teams must be extremely creative and strategic to try and compete on equal footing. However, the gap between them and the giants is so large that often effort alone isn't enough. Small teams depend on smaller sponsors and deals that don't offer the same level of financial stability. They don't have the resources to invest in cutting-edge technology like advanced simulators or state-of-the-art wind tunnels, which means their cars start off at a performance disadvantage from the very beginning of the season. To make matters worse, big teams often dominate rule negotiations and can shape them in ways that favor their own development, leaving smaller teams even further behind. Furthermore, the lack of financial support directly affects the work of small teams. Without the money needed to hire the best engineers, mechanics, and drivers, they're often forced to improvise. This results in cars that aren't on the same level as those of the big teams, hurting competitiveness and creating an even greater gap between the teams. This financial disparity is also reflected in the marketing capabilities of the teams. Big brands have massive budgets to promote their teams and ensure their sponsors get the visibility they paid for. Meanwhile, smaller teams struggle to attract major sponsors, creating a vicious cycle where they have less visibility, fewer sponsors, and therefore fewer resources to improve. Even when smaller teams manage to make significant progress with their cars, their limited resources for maintenance and upgrades mean that any technical innovation can quickly be outpaced by teams with deeper pockets, erasing any gains they might have achieved. This makes the dream of a small team breaking the giant's dominance often seem like nothing more than a distant fantasy. Still, some small teams manage to survive and even occasionally shine, but these exceptions are rare. They require a rare combination of talent, luck, and strategy to compete at the highest level. Most of the time, small teams are just trying to stay alive within a system that favors the big and powerful. And with this constant struggle for survival, smaller teams are forced to become even more creative, seeking alternatives that often involve financial risks, which leads to another critical issue: the balance of power in negotiations. Well, we're heading into the fifth topic, but before that, I noticed you haven't liked this video yet. That's very important for YouTube to keep recommending my content to you, and that way I'll keep bringing you the best content about the world of Formula One. So leave a like on this video, it's free. Thanks, now let's continue. In Formula One, contracts aren't just a formality, they are instruments of power. The negotiations between drivers and teams can define not only the future of a season, but also the driver's entire career. Often, what seems like a simple decision about where a driver will race is actually the reflection of a complex network of agreements, strategies, and of course, money. Drivers, especially the most talented ones, are a team's greatest assets. This is directly reflected in the contracts they sign, which in many cases involve astronomical figures. The bigger the driver's name, the more negotiating power they have, and consequently, the more pressure they can exert on the team to ensure better conditions. This includes not only the contract value, but also working conditions, car development, and even preferential treatment in technical decisions, like adjustments during races. Additionally, these contracts are often negotiated with the help of powerful agents who know how to maneuver within the rules of the game. These agents not only help secure high salaries for their clients, but also play a crucial role in ensuring that the driver is placed in a team where they have a real chance to shine. Contracts thus become a crucial tool in maintaining the balance of power in the sport, benefiting the most influential drivers and leaving rookies and lesser-known drivers with fewer options. Top teams, with their robust budgets, have a significant advantage when it comes to signing drivers. They offer long-term, extremely advantageous contracts to ensure that a driver's talent is fully utilized. Meanwhile, smaller teams, lacking the same financial muscle, must seek drivers who bring sponsorship money and are often willing to accept lower salaries, creating a huge gap in working conditions between drivers in big teams and those in small ones. This negotiation game also affects the internal dynamics within teams. When a driver secures a multi-million-dollar contract, they naturally become the team's star, which can lead to internal rivalries, especially if the relationship between the two drivers isn't well managed. In teams like Mercedes or Ferrari, where driver contracts can exceed millions, the pressure for results can be immense, creating tensions both inside and outside the cockpit. It becomes clear that contract negotiations are more than just a simple exchange of numbers. They reflect a system where money and power dictate who rises to the top and who remains on the margins. And as money and power continue to dominate Formula One, smaller teams are constantly challenged to find ways to negotiate contracts that bring not just visibility, but also concrete results. These negotiations often have a direct impact on strategic decisions within teams, especially regarding who stays and who leaves, a reality that only intensifies as the sport's major powers strive to secure more control over the championship's future. In Formula One, rules are fundamental in defining how races unfold, but often these rules are altered in ways that favor the most powerful teams. When significant changes are made, there is always pressure to ensure they serve the interests of the major corporations that dominate the sport, creating a distortion in the competition and pushing smaller teams even further away from having a real chance at success. These rule changes can manifest in various ways, from adjustments in car design to modifications in race formats or even in the number of races in a season. When these rules are altered, the trend is for the big teams, with their financial power and ability to adapt, to be the first to benefit. They have the resources needed to test the new configurations and adapt their cars more quickly, while smaller teams struggle to make the same adjustments. The influence of the big teams on the rulemaking process is a fundamental aspect of this dirty game. Since the teams dominate the voting and negotiations within Formula One, they often manage to shape changes in ways that ensure the status quo remains intact. Rules that benefit the sport's powerhouses are often not seen as changes to improve competitiveness, but rather as a way to maintain the dominance of the big teams and prevent the smaller ones from challenging this order. Another example of how rule changes favor the major teams is the introduction of new technologies. When a rule allows a significant change in car design, such as a new engine specification or aerodynamics, the big teams can heavily invest in research and development to maximize the benefits of the change. Meanwhile, the smaller teams, lacking the same resources, fall behind, unable to keep up with the innovations. Moreover, the introduction of new rules often requires significant investments, something the big teams can absorb with ease. Meanwhile, smaller teams, already struggling to survive financially, are forced to make tough choices, sometimes sacrificing the competitiveness of their cars just to stay in the championship. As a result, the game becomes unbalanced, with the big teams thriving while the small ones fight merely to stay alive. This process of rule adjustment also directly influences contracts and broadcasting rights. Larger teams, wielding more influence and power, manage to secure more races on circuits that favor their characteristics, whether by the type of track or by the visibility the event offers. This creates more opportunities for these teams to earn points and attract sponsors, while smaller teams continue to be sidelined. Thus, rule changes become a direct reflection of financial and political power within Formula One, favoring those already at the top and making it even harder for others to climb. It's a vicious cycle where the rules of the game are often shaped to ensure that the big teams remain in control, maintaining the status quo. And when the power to influence the rules is so strong, it becomes clear that true competitiveness can only be achieved when Formula One's powerhouses actually play fair, something that remains far from reality in such a heavily interest-driven environment. And if you made it this far, leave a comment saying F1 rules need to change. So I'll know that you also realize how the big team's power game influences the sport's decisions. Continuing. The future of Formula One is a topic that sparks much debate, especially when it comes to making the championship fairer and more balanced. The current system, dominated by a select group of powerful teams, leaves little room for smaller teams to compete on equal terms. And of course, this affects the excitement of the races, as we often know beforehand who will be the big winner of the season. The lingering question is, how can this be changed? One possibility that is constantly discussed is the creation of rules aimed at reducing the financial disparity between teams. This involves controlling spending on technology and redistributing resources among teams. Some proposals include capping team budgets to ensure that everyone has similar conditions to develop their cars. This would boost competitiveness, as big teams would no longer be able to invest unlimitedly to maintain their advantage. Another idea that has been suggested is creating a more balanced point structure, where smaller teams who traditionally struggle to score points would have more chances to achieve results. This could include changes to qualifying sessions or adjustments to the point system in races, making victories and podiums more accessible to everyone. This way, smaller teams would have a better chance to surprise and fight for wins, generating more excitement and unpredictability. Additionally, changing the rules regarding car design could also help level the playing field. By making cars more similar in technical specifications, driver skill and team strategy would become more important factors than the financial power of each team. This would mean that instead of the best cars dominating, races would be decided by who has the best strategy and who is the most skilled on the track. However, for these changes to truly happen, a joint effort would be needed between the FIA, the F1 organizers, and the teams themselves. The major F1 powerhouses, like Mercedes and Red Bull, hold enormous influence and often have their own visions for the future of the sport. These teams, dominating investments in broadcasting rights, could resist any changes that threaten their supremacy. Still, the demand for a fairer and more balanced championship is growing stronger. The call for a more thrilling F1, where any team has a real chance to win, is getting louder. If F1 doesn't take concrete steps to level the competition, the future of the sport could be at risk, as many fans and even sponsors might lose interest in a predictable championship where the outcome always seems the same. In the end, Formula One must evolve to continue being the spectacle it is, but in a way that is fair to all teams and drivers. Changes are necessary not just to improve competitiveness, but also to ensure that F1 remains a sport that everyone can feel part of, regardless of the team they race for or the size of their budget. So, did you manage to understand a little more about what happens behind the scenes of Formula One? What seemed like just a game of speed actually turns out to be a giant chessboard where power, money, and politics are always at play. The decisions we make, or better said, the ones the big teams and organizers make, completely shape the championship and often have little to do with what happens on the track. But will we ever see a fairer and more balanced championship? Or are we doomed to always watch the same ones dominating the races? Leave your opinion in the comments because the discussion is just beginning. F1 might be a sport about speed, but politics, money, and power are the real engines behind this machine. And if you, just like me, are passionate about the world of Formula One and want to dive even deeper into this incredible universe, don't leave this video without sharing it with that friend who's also a fan of F1 and will love this content. See those video suggestions on your screen? The first one I chose especially for you, and the other is a recommendation from YouTube itself. See you there. Until the next video.